April 19th meeting of the Board of the Harbor Commissions will now come to order. Mary, will you call the roll, please?
Betsy Kramer.
Present.
Bill Spicer, absent. Corey Bantalan. Here. Eric Friedman, absent. Frank Kelly. Here. Jim Sloan. Here. Helene Webb,
There she is. Okay, Mr. Friedman, are there any changes to the agenda?
Madam Chair, there are no changes to the agenda.
Okay. Now, this is the point where we take public comment. Helene? Public comment, but there seems to be none at this point. So we'll move on to the approval of the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second. All of those in favor?
Aye.
And the minutes are approved. And for the department update, Scott, please.
Yes, good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. In terms of council actions, the council adopted a resolution requesting and approving or authorizing a $7.3 million loan from the Department of Boating and Waterways for our next 4 phases of construction in Marina 1. Also authorized documents related to the loan to be executed by the City Administrator, Waterfront Director, and or Finance Director. This is a prerequisite for applying for the loan. In order to turn in the loan application, you have to have this resolution included. We got the application in at the end of March before the April 1st deadline. As you well know, the status of Department of Boating and Waterways right now is very much uncertain. It's on the governor's cut list, but the staff told us to just keep on pressing forward as if things were going to work out the way we want them to work out. So we've got our loan in on time and moving forward. Carl and I went down to a Army Corps of Engineers workshop at the headquarters in the LA District headquarters. The Corps presented information on their budget development process, which has changed significantly since earmarks were eliminated at the Congress, and they've talked about their budget cycle and timeline and how they prioritize projects and so forth. It was interesting. They have many civil, we think of them in our little department as our dredging lifeline, but they have many civil works projects, including dams and water projects, flood control. And interestingly, there were only 3 harbors represented there. Everybody else at the meeting was there for other items. And so just Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Channel Islands were there at the meeting. So when we had our breakout sessions to discuss navigation and dredging, it was a nice opportunity to meet face-to-face with Scott John, who's our project engineer, and also his boss, Steve Dwyer. So always good to maintain those relationships with the Corps. We went out to lunch with them, and it was a very educational opportunity. We will continue to work with the Corps to update the criteria and the list of budget item justifications that they use, including commercial working harbor with the commercial fishery, the presence of the Coast Guard cutter Blackfin, and then something that we'll touch on next, industrial vessels. In particular, we're going to talk a little bit about an oil spill response vessel, which would be, I think, a very nice card to play in terms of we have 8 oil platforms within 10 miles of the harbor entrance, and if we can house a fast oil response vessel within the protection of the harbor, I think that would be another good card to have on our side. In terms of tentative agendas for the May meeting, we're working with Paddle Sports on a new lease, and also there was a Finance Committee meeting about 2 weeks ago in which the Finance Committee recommended that the waterfront look with the Harbor Commission at our budget reserve policies and review those and see if they need any updating or cleaning up. So that's tentative for May if we get there with the Paddle Sports lease. I would also I believe we would want to look at the budget reserves issue at the Budget Committee level first before bringing it forward to the full Commission as well. And that concludes my report unless there are any questions.
Just on that the budget reserve, what prompted that, or what's the Finance Committee looking at?
Last year, during the budget process, some of the council members were expressed concern about the general fund dipping into its operating reserves and going below the required reserve amounts to meet budget. So they recommended that the Finance Committee look into this and bring back a report. So it's been quite a few months, and they came back, and the staff gave a report to the Finance Committee recommending that there be a supermajority of council to approve any use of reserves. To use reserves, you have to also come forward at that time. If you're going to request to use reserves, you need to come forward with a plan for restoring the reserves. And I believe that was about it. And since the waterfront is a little bit different in that we use our Harbor Preservation Fund for our capital reserve, and it hasn't changed since 1995, they recommended the Harbor Commission take a look at that and get back to them.
In light of the same type of things that they're looking at the general fund?
Correct, although we haven't dipped into our reserves. The operating reserves, as you've seen in these budget presentations, consist of 25% of our operating budget. And the reasoning behind that was that if a very bad thing happens, we have 3 months' worth of reserves to operate on. So they wanted to take a look at that and understand that.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Thank you very much for the report. And moving on to the business services report. Are you doing that, Scott, or is...
I'm going to take care of that. We'll let Brian off the hook for 1 more month.
Okay. All right.
He's just coming to get acquainted with some of these things. The Minnow Cafe or Ty's Cafe remodel is ongoing. As you know, Brophy's assumed the lease for the Minnow Cafe last January of 2011 and stopped operations after the Harbor Festival in October. They've since been in there tearing apart the space, and the reason it's taking this long is because actually quite a bit, if not most of the work, is taking place in the Brophy's side of things, in the prep room over in Brophy's. They redid all the floors with a really nice epoxy flooring. They put new, they cleaned up the walls, new drywall and so forth. I believe John Bennett, he told me they did all new plumbing in the Brophy's prep side. And then, of course, on the Minnow side, they tore out the ceiling and left the trusses and stained them and put in a wood ceiling, as you see there, and some exposed ductwork. So it looks really nice and gives it a much bigger feel. But and they also changed the facade. They put in those 4 windows that you see there and a glass door on either side of the space. So that, along with the raised vaulted ceiling, really opens up the space. So. We're excited about that opening up. The new restaurant menu will include breakfast burritos, breakfast sandwiches, French toast, and then for lunch items, sandwiches, burgers, and tacos. Also, they're adding salads to the menu. And then they've got a little section of real popular Brophy's items, such as their clam chowder, fried calamari, fish and chips, shrimp, and so forth. And John has also been making noises about having delivery during the busy summer months out into the marinas. We'll see if that happens or not, but it's a novel idea and could help maximize sales. So, cafe is scheduled to open in May. We'll see if that comes to pass, but that's what they're telling me at this point. And then moving on to what I alluded to earlier, the Clean Seas oil response vessels. Sorry about that. Clean Seas came to us last year and said they were having 4 new oil spill response vessels manufactured up in Washington. And here's the Ocean Scout, I believe, going through its sea trials up in Washington. They approached us about berthing them in Santa Barbara Harbor, and we don't have any space for them right now, but we're racking our brains to come up with something creative. These vessels will replace the existing Clean Seas vessels, which are larger and have a top speed of about 10 knots. These vessels are capable of 26 knots. We got the chance to tour them. They have oil skimming equipment, which is pretty interesting. They have side doors that open up at the waterline, and then they put out V-shaped booms and sort of herd the oil into the hull of the vessel, where the scrubbers scrub it and squeegee it out, and then they can store quite a bit of the oil on the vessel, in addition to whatever I said, 1,500 feet of oil containment boom and also oil dispersant materials. So 2 will be based in Ventura. They'd like to base at least 1 in Santa Barbara. So we had them, when they came down last week, we had them maneuver in and out of the Marina 4B Entai area. Right now this area is leased to the Philippa, but the lease comes up about this time next year. So we would hope that we could squeeze them in at that time. I haven't heard back from the owners of the Philippa. Emailed them a couple weeks ago, and I haven't heard of what their intentions are. They do have a 5-year option to extend that lease, but they've been actively trying to sell the vessel. So we could fit them in a year, or worst case scenario, we can fit Clean Seas in probably in this location in 6 years. And if that were to be the case, we'd look for some alternate place to house them while waiting for this to become available. But very nice vessels, fast, and state-of-the-art oil spill response. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, comments? Commissioner Bantalan.
Thanks for the report, Scott. Couple items on the Minnow Cafe remodel. Just want to say, kudos to Brophy's Brothers. It looks beautiful. They obviously know how to run a business. I think it's going to be increased revenue for us, a nice new place to go for folks in town. I mean, it really just looks great. One question on that. Obviously, they've spent a good chunk of money on remodeling it. I know we have a program to offset some of the costs, some of the rent costs for businesses in the harbor. Do they take advantage of that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bantalan, that's exactly right. Actually, the old Minnow Cafe lease expired, and it's on a holdover status, and they transferred it in that state. They don't even have a lease technically for the Minnow space. But that lease has a capital improvement reimbursement clause in it. Not a very big one because it's a smaller money operation than Brophy's, but Brophy's has that provision as well. So they'll be utilizing both of those provisions to help with underwriting some of these costs, but just a small portion of the costs because they're really going all out.
Well, it's good to hear. I'm looking forward to that opening soon. And then one question on the Clean Seas. Do they also respond to oil sheens? I know I've been out on a derrick, and I know that they have to report any sheens, whether they're natural or not, and I know that we have quite a bit of seepage. So are they going back and forth trying to get little spots? Are they just waiting for major ones, or do we know that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bantalan, I don't know myself what level of sheen that they respond to. They have different trailerable boats that they use, and then these will be at sea all the time and staffed 24/7. But do you have any insight on that, Mick?
Sure, Madam Chair, Commissioner Bantalan. Typically, in oil spill recovery, and this was very much a challenge in the Gulf with the Deepwater Horizon spill, oil has to congeal to a certain level to be, if you will, gatherable. And it sounds odd, but one of our greatest allies in the case of a sheen is typically sunshine, where it will evaporate the sheen rather than expend the time and resources to try and collect something that's essentially not collectible until it congeals to a certain level.
Thank you.
Commissioner Webb.
Director Reedman, thank you for your report. How big is the Ocean Scout?
These vessels are 65 feet long by 22 feet beam.
Would they fit in the old dry dock area if that were adapted?
We've been considering that. They would fit, they would be, Carl's going to build out 8 slips there and an end tie. And so that big of a vessel on that end tie would be sticking out pretty far into the harbor. So we've been internally just discussing various options. The best option would be right at the mouth of the harbor in Marina 4 where they could get right out of the harbor. We're a little bit concerned about it making things a little cramped on the built-out FN tie. Another option would be to not build out the FN tie and just leave it as a lease space as it has been for many years. That's exactly what we did with Marina 4. It was a lease space, and we came to the commission and recommended that we keep it as a lease space, and that's what we've done there. So, but we've kind of already started down the path of building out those slips and the end tie, and we've mentioned assigning them off the wait list. So we're looking at it, but it's definitely the lesser of those two options.
What if you just did 6 out? Would that give you enough width?
These are all things we can look into.
Commissioner Sloan.
You probably thought about this, but how about moving the Captain Fred's dinner cruise boat? The name of it slips me right now, but move that over to an end tie, maybe that end tie, because that's smaller. That's only like 48, isn't it?
He's pretty big. I believe Celebration is 72 feet.
Oh, is it? Okay. Okay.
Oh,
I thought it was smaller now.
Yeah.
Just an idea. Okay. And then also, do you know when the new Brophy Brothers Cafe downstairs is supposed to open? The remodeled one that we just looked at.
Oh, the Ties Cafe?
Yeah, Ty's Cafe, excuse me.
I talked to one of the managers who says John is shooting for May 1st. I was in the property this week. I don't think it's going to make May 1st. I would say end of May, but.
And thank you for the report. I have a question, or at least a comment. You said that the Clean Seas oil spill response may do dispersants as well as containment. That is sort of a red flag, of course.
Madam Chair, it's the specifications of the vessels are in your packet, or should be. Yes, they're right here. It does have dispersant capability. It carries some. I don't know what, again, I'm not as familiar with oil spill response and what the preferred methods are. Obviously, dispersing is an option, but probably not the best.
Just making the observation. Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks for the report. Moving on to the Harbor Operations Report. Mr. Gronman.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Well, it's an exciting time of year for the Operations Division. This is when we have our springtime events, and I want to remind you and anybody watching that we have Operation Clean Sweep coming up on May 5th, followed by our Harbor Nautical Swap Meet on May 12th. Both of them, it's our 6th annual event for each. The Operation Clean Sweep this year, we're going to keep moving down Marina 1. We're going to be concentrating on fingers E through H, and we're still inviting volunteers to join us. We particularly need dockside volunteers. For those who don't know about Operation Clean Sweep, it's a seafloor debris removal program. We started in Marina 4 6 years ago, and we've been working our way around the harbor. We've managed to collect 18,000 pounds of marine junk off the seafloor, so with any luck, we ought to be able to push past the 10-ton mark with the May 5th event. If folks want to volunteer, they should feel free to call me at 897-2587. That's 897-2587. My name is Mick Cronman. I'm the Harbor Operations Manager. They can call me directly. And so we're looking forward to that. Coffee and donuts and water are free at the beginning, and we have a free lunch provided by Lunchbox Catering at the end of the event at 11:30. So there's food, coffee, donuts, water, and quite a fishing trip. As a matter of fact, I have a couple slides to show you. This is one of our happy group. You will get dirty. That's the part of the fun. One of our happy group of volunteers from a couple years ago. And this is the typical kind of work. This is why we need dock volunteers. We've got the gloves, we've got the lines, we've got the clips. All we need is folks with a big appetite and anxious to do some good community service and see some crazy things come off the bottom, and you will. There's tires, bicycles, barbecues, bowsprits, the list goes on. And this is what it looks like in the dumpster, and Marburg is usually there by 1 o'clock to haul it off. The swap meet is the next week. The swap meet is on May 12th, and that is our other signature spring event. And this slide here is typical of the swap meet. You see fishing rods, sailboats, a steering wheel in the lower right-hand corner. We're still accepting vendor applications. It only costs $10 for a vendor application. If you think about it, for $20 you could bring your truck and you could have an extra space behind you to spill out all your wares, and it's an absolute value. You talk to the vendors in the previous 5 years, and they almost always completely sell out. I'm really trying to boost up the visibility this year. We had a nice article in the Log newspaper last week, and we're getting calls from San Pedro and various places. So this is the spot to go, and this is also the spot to sell rods, reels, sailboat rigging, kayaks, surfboards, you name it. If it's nautical, this will be the place where you find it. So that's on May 12th. That's the Harbor Nautical Swap Meet. It's our 6th one. Again, if you want to sign up, I'd suggest calling our Harbor Administration number at 805-564-5531. That's 805-564-5531. It's also, if you go onto the Santa Barbara City's website and click on departments and click on the waterfront, there's a link to the swap meet, and you'll find a vendor form there that you can download, fill out, and mail in with a check. So you can sign up that way as well. You don't have to walk through the door to sign up. That's why it'd be pretty difficult for the folks in San Pedro and San Francisco and what have you to do. So we're trying to reach out and make this the biggest, best event we've had in 6 years. And with that, I conclude my report. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Anybody? Commissioner Bandelin?
Not a big question, but I just thought of it while you were talking about advertising. Do we put that on city TV as well? Things like this, just our different harbor events?
I believe that's on the crawl on the bottom. I'll double check with Brian Slagle. If it's not, we'll get it on there. Thank you for the reminder.
Okay, thanks.
And Mick, is that again at 8 o'clock in the morning? And will there be donuts? And
It's from 8 to noon at the swap meet, and thank you for reminding me, taking my attention back to the swap meet. I neglected to mention the other half. I think I did this last year as well. Equally as important is it's combined with a hazardous materials turn-in event. We have a big hazmat truck there, and so while you're digging out all the goodies from your dock box and your forecastle and what have you to get rid of and sell or cram back in there after you buy things, please take advantage of this. This is especially for the boaters in Santa Barbara Harbor who received an entry ticket to the hazmat truck in their April billing, the golden ticket as we call it. But if you got old cans of paint, varnish, gasoline, small amounts of gas or diesel and what have you, this is the place to do it. You don't got to trek out to UCSB or other hazardous materials facilities to get rid of this. The hazardous materials truck is going to come to you. And so we would encourage slip permittees and boat owners in the harbor to take advantage of that, as well as the swap meet on the 12th.
thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to add, there will be coffee and donuts and bagels available, sponsored by the Harbor Merchants Association, who help organize and put this thing on and sponsor that.
Great, thank you very much.
Typically, we have oranges too, care of the Berryman. So
For those who are
typically,
healthy. Okay.
never count. Every year is a little bit different on the food, but there's plenty of it. People are genuinely surprised when they get free food. It's a great aspect of the event.
Great, thank you very much. And now on to new business, and the first one is the request for the proposal for the 132B Harbor Way Chandlery Building. Mary, could you read the staff recommendation?
Recommendation that Harbor Commission A consider the selection committee's review and analysis of the two business proposals received from Club Travel and the Santa Barbara Fish Market for the second floor offices at 132B Harbor Way. B, accept the recommendation from the selection committee and make a finding that the Santa Barbara Fish Market is the most responsive and appropriate business to lease the offices. And C, direct staff to negotiate a lease agreement with Santa Barbara Fish Market based on the business terms outlined in the RFP and proceed to City Council for final approval.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, as you'll recall, the department began offering this space, advertising this space as available for lease back in late September. So it's been quite a while, using City TV, other free media such as adding it to the slip billing, inserts to the slip billing and city water billing, Craigslist, hanging a sign on the building, which actually generated the most phone calls. Unfortunately, after several months of advertising it and 16 inquiries, we only received one response back in January, the first time around from Club Travel, who subsequently submitted a second response. So it was determined to reissue the RFP, just basically extend the deadline of the RFP to try and take one more shot at getting a good, solid ocean-related use in there. And these are fairly decent offices. They're right next to ours on the second floor of the West Marine or Chandlery building, if you will, facing Ledbetter Point. So the RFP was extended until April 2nd. 2 responses were received at that time, one again from Club Travel and a second one from Santa Barbara Fish Market. The Club Travel proposal involved 2 companies, actually. Club Travel assists in the sale of cruise line vacations and import excursions. They currently have businesses open to do this in Nevada and Minnesota. They're right now talking about starting another one in the Lake Tahoe area, and then this one would be a startup of this type of business. They would also like to develop walking tours for the cruise ship passengers visiting Santa Barbara, and it's well intended. They'd like to keep some of those cruise ship passengers in Santa Barbara and in the area instead of many of them go over the hill for wine tasting, but we've got quite a few good wine tasting places right down in the funk zone there by where they land. The other company that they would share the office space with is a legal resource lawyer referral service, called Represent You. And the idea would be that Club Travel would grow in to fill the whole space, and then the Represent You would sort of fade out as the Club Travel expanded into it. The other proposal was from the Santa Barbara Fish Market, which, as you know, currently leases space at 117A Harbor Way at the end of the building. And they use that for their fish processing operations. They have a retail store there, but they also do a tremendous amount of wholesale sales to restaurants and caterers and so forth. I believe 80, we were told. And also functions as a buyer and a distributor for the local fishing fleet. So when big loads of black cod, or as they're properly known, sablefish come in, or white sea bass, a big boatload, much more than the local market can absorb, they will run this to other markets and broker it for the fishermen. The space is fairly small to begin with and has a small second floor mezzanine or loft. And their business has just outgrown itself. Frankly, if you've been by there, you know what I'm talking about. And upstairs, if you probably haven't been up there, they've really outgrown that. I think they've got 2 people per desk working on computers, making orders, taking orders, and so they really need some office space. So this looked like a good fit. We discussed it with the selection committee on April 4th, Commissioners Sloan, Bantalin, and Spicer. And this time we went the extra step of bringing in the 2 parties and letting them make their own pitch to the selection committee. And so after receiving those proposals, we discussed them amongst ourselves, and the selection committee recommended Santa Barbara Fish Market as being the most appropriate choice for this space. So the business terms were basically lined out in the RFP, the permitted use being an administrative and accounting office with no food processing or sales permitted. The proposed term listed in the RFP was 1 to 5 years at a minimum monthly rent of $1,995 per month. And then the insurance that the city is requiring now on all its contracts and lease contracts has recently been increased to $2 million. So that'll be the new insurance requirement. So if the commission concurs with the selection committee recommendation, staff will go ahead and begin negotiations with the fish market along those lines outlined above. And I would also like to add that Brian Colgate is the owner of the fish market. He met with us that day. He's also here tonight in support of his proposal, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
Thank you very much, Scott. And any questions, comments? Commissioner Webb.
I think it's a really good fit for the harbor, and they've been here a long time, and I definitely would agree. Good choice.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kelly.
This is a little off the point, but Scott, why did the city raise the minimum insurance that it requires from $1 million to $2 million? Do you have any idea?
Gee, we've had that talk. Chair Kramer, Commissioner Kelly, as far as I understand it, the risk management folks, various municipal risk management folks, had a big powwow about last spring. And the city of Santa Barbara has been asking for $1 million comprehensive general liability for something like over 20 years. And so the consensus coming from this meeting was that it's time to change that and increase it. And so they're looking at really right now looking at all the insurance requirements and raising them to $2 million on automotive liability and so forth. So it was a conscious decision, and also based on the fact that it had been $1 million for so long.
Okay. Had we ever gone, well, I don't want to take too much time on it because we're actually doing something else, but it's interesting if we'd ever overshot the $1 million liability, or if it just someone thought $2 million sounds better. Just asking.
Commissioner Kelly, I think probably the latter. Obviously, the first tenants that got this squawked, there is a means of appealing it. For instance, when we did our lease with Mike Pizell, the Marine Surveyor has a 160 square foot office upstairs in the Marine Center building. But the point that the risk management has a form that the tenant can fill out, and it's not based on, ouch, it's too expensive for me. You have to have some other reason that not just it's too expensive, but you have to explain to the risk manager why your business is a low risk to the city. And Mike Pizell was successfully able to explain that. He never has anybody come up to his office. He goes down to their boats and does his work. So there is a little wiggle room there, but the point is that staff can't lobby risk management on behalf of the tenant. The tenant has to do it themselves.
Okay, good. Good to know that there is a option. And I did want to congratulate Brian on how he has grown the business, because I remember when you were in the closet, literally, with a little tiny counter. And that was it. And it's quite amazing what you've been able to do. Thank you.
Commissioner Bantland?
I was just wondering, public comment. I didn't see a slip, but
Off of that, yeah.
if you'd like, I'm not asking you to. Just
Would you come up to the microphone, please? Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to to Scott and the Waterfront Department, and it's been just really great to have a landlord that's been so supportive of working harbor and having a fish market be there, and just everything that's happening day in and day out. It is intense, and but I think it definitely has become a element to the harbor that's just brings fishing and fish, and that's what a harbor's about. So I just really appreciate all the support of the community and with you guys, and it's a great thing to be a part of. So
Thank you very much. We appreciate your being there. Yeah. Thanks. Any more comments or questions from the commissioners?
I'll make a motion that we,
Yeah, we have to make two of them, I think.
two?
Yeah.
Just one?
Well,
Yeah, that we approve the recommendation as submitted in the memorandum.
and then I think, okay, all those in favor of that?
No, there need to be a
A
second.
second, sorry. I mean, I thought Corey did. Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Then I think we have to make one to motion to direct staff to negotiate a lease agreement, don't we?
There are three recommendations, but I think Commissioner Kelly's motion
Okay,
was to
okay.
include all
All right.
three, so I think we're
Great.
good.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. So the next is the fish die-off plan response plan.
Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and consider a draft fish die-off response plan for Santa Barbara Harbor.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, you may recall a few months ago, as part of a harbor operations report, I mentioned that we were beginning work on a fish die-off response plan, and your commission asked that we bring this to you before we finalize the plan as part of our emergency response plan manual, or as an addition to. Excuse me, and that's what I'm here to do tonight. So this is a report to you. One note before we begin. This is in report form, if you will. What I'm going to try and do is offer you some background and history as to why we're undertaking this effort, and what the general structure of it will look like. When we committed to the emergency response plan manual, it will take on a different form. The emergency response plan manual is a book that when you open up and in the middle of the emergency, it has checklists and phone numbers. And it obviously will have some of the structure I'm going to talk about tonight. But Rod, I'm sure you didn't want to be weighed down with names and phone numbers. So this is the 10,000-foot view, but it gives you some background and lets you know why we're doing what we're doing, and hopefully we'll never have to use it. So by way of background, occasionally we have algal blooms in the harbor, in the channel, that make their way into Santa Barbara Harbor, and they cause depleted oxygen events, which starve fish for oxygen, and fish die, and sometimes they end up in harbors in large numbers. Thankfully, we've had only minor die-offs of this nature, and major cleanup efforts haven't been required. That being said, so much is not the story for our neighbors to the south, Redondo and Ventura in particular, and last year in particular. Last March, Redondo Beach endured a die-off that was truly an environmental disaster. And part of what we're trying to advance tonight is the notion that a fish die-off response plan isn't intended to address a regional disaster like an earthquake, like a, excuse me, like a tsunami, excuse me, or wildland fires that's raging through the backcountry. But make no mistake, the plan that we're putting together and the plan that Redondo put together on the fly addresses a considerable environmental disaster. It took a week to clean up the sardines that came into Redondo Harbor, 175 tons of them, and that effort included 700 volunteers and cost $300,000, not including the trucking costs, which the company that trucked them to Victorville didn't charge them for. They did that pro bono. The next month, in April last year, Ventura had a similar die-off, albeit smaller. It was still quite a cleanup effort for them. It was 14 tons of dead sardines. And it took a whole lot of fishermen and volunteers and Port District staff to clean up. And so it's in response to these kind of events and seeing the occasional modest die-off in Santa Barbara Harbor that we thought two things. Number one, we should develop a response plan. And number two, we have two very good sources whom we can go to tell us how to do it, that being Redondo and Ventura. So here's what it looks like so that you realize that we don't believe we're overstating the case. This was Redondo in March of 2011. The fish were extremely thick, and there was an unfortunate cycle that developed where the fish were dead on the surface 2 and 3 feet deep, and after they were dead for a while, they would sink to the bottom, and after a couple of days, they would gas up and refloat. And so you had this continuous floating and sinking phenomenon going on for a week. It turned the harbor blood red. You could smell it all the way downtown for 2 weeks, down into downtown Redondo, and so it was a major deal. Here's what it looked like from the air. So you come down in the morning to the harbor to your work or your office or to play or whatever, and you come and find this. It'd be good to know that somebody had a plan to clean it up. And I threw this slide in for the irony of it. I couldn't help it. The sign to the right says it all. But there were actually, when Scott and I met with the fire chief, there were actually vans backed up down the launch ramps and backed up to the walkways, shoveling it in, vans from local fish eateries. So I'll get to that in a minute. That has to do with perimeter security. Ultimately, as you'll hear me discuss, it came down to buckets and carts and scoop nets and really manual labor and hundreds of volunteers, because there was no simple way to corral the fish. And although Vactor trucks were used to suck them off the rocks, you can't plant a Vactor truck in the water, and they're just not intended to take that kind of liquid along with the product. So it was mostly just elbow grease and basic rudimentary tools, wheelbarrows, buckets, nets, and what have you. Onto the hardscape, right? Because we're aware of the fact you can't boom these animals off or tow them out to sea and have them land 200 tons of sardines on the beaches of Montecito. That wouldn't be an acceptable solution either. So you need to get the animals up onto the hardscape, and you need to get the front loaders going, and you need to get them into lined dumpsters, and that seemed to be the best way it worked for both these die-offs in Redondo and Ventura. So the waterfront director and I, realizing that now was the time to act and we should strike while the iron was hot and fresh in the minds of the people who did these cleanups, we went down last December to Redondo, and Dan Madrigal, the fire chief, harbor master down there, was extremely gracious, spent over a half a day with us, and took us hour by hour, literally through the entire cleanup, every aspect of it. He endured countless interruptions, mostly from me, because I didn't want to miss anything. I wanted to know every bit of detail I could. And when we came back, we've also gathered information from our own city emergency services manager, Yolanda McGlinchey, and talked to the Ventura Port District harbor master, public health agencies, fishery scientists, and waste disposal and composting facilities. And so it's with that background and that research we're presenting the general plan to you tonight. The plan itself is based on and this is one thing we learned from the harbor master in Redondo, it's based on the incident command system. And a little background first on the incident command system. The incident command system developed from, actually it took 10 years to develop, and it began in the 1970s when there were wildfires raging through California, and they required multi-agency response, as not surprising. And the agencies found out that their interoperability was really not there. They didn't have the same radio frequencies. They weren't, communicating well. They didn't even have the same couplings to hook up to the same fire hydrants in adjacent districts. So they realized something's really wrong here relative to addressing multi-agency disaster areas, regional disasters. And so they developed the Incident Command System, which is very close in structure to the Standardized Emergency Management System, the SEM system that we're all familiar with, that's utilized in the Emergency Operating System. So the Incident Command System, and I'm going to go through it here relative to a fish die-off, is the way we generally see it would operate in that scenario. It's well suited for a couple of things I mentioned. It provides great structure for coordinating our planning. It divides and identifies tasks, which is very critical. It provides an organizational framework for responders and integrates facilities, equipment, and personnel procedures. It assists in the communicating internally and with the public, and resolves the crisis in a timely and efficient fashion. These are the cornerstones of the incident command approach. And if there's ever a question if what we're doing is right or wrong, we can always go back and make sure we're doing all of these things. There are other checkpoints I will mention as well. So who's the incident commander? That'd be Scott Reedman, the waterfront director. He would maintain overall command and coordination of the incident response. He will be working with the other department heads, the city administrator, the mayor and council to receive incident information from the operations level, to organize briefings, work with the public information officer, who's probably the most important other person we're going to get to in this discussion, on timely press releases, keep the city administrator update, and establish the on-site command post. The on-site command post could be something like the waterfront conference room, or it actually could be a field command post, depending on the operational cycles and the wisdom of having it in one place versus the other. That's not determined until we come to the event. The liaison officer would be the Arbor Operations Manager, or if it happened tomorrow or in the foreseeable future, myself. And my job would be to coordinate communication responses with other agencies. These are basically local, city, county, and state agencies, and possibly federal agencies, if in fact the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service were involved relative to bird issues, if marine mammals were involved relative to, if the National Marine Fisheries Service, were involved relative to marine mammal issues. But we have contacts for all these people, and we also have, you see the last bullet, an independent scientific advisor. That's one of the most important people to get on scene immediately, because as you'll see when I discuss the public information officer role, having an independent scientific advisor on scene to assess what the problem is, to assess what caused the problem, and what any public health or environmental consequences there could be from the problem is absolutely critical. The safety and security officer is kind of a combined task. It will be overseen by the city's risk manager, who would process all injury claims, because this response is going to take hundreds of volunteers. But at the same time, city police would be involved to provide landside security, including maintaining a perimeter security. You can imagine when folks get up in the morning and find there's 100 tons of dead sardines in the harbor, everybody and their brother is going to want to come down and see it. I'd want to, right? I can't blame them. Well, we're going to need some perimeter security, because we just can't have thousands of people in the harbor when we're trying to respond to an environmental disaster like this. It may include getting liveaboards out of the harbor for a short period of time. It may include closing down the harbor completely to everybody except emergency workers, emergency personnel. Harbor Patrol would probably be responsible for maintaining entry and exit to the harbor. In Redondo, they had to close the harbor completely for 2 different intervals, so that you can't have boats driving through this stuff. It's as simple as that. You have to isolate the problem and work on it. The public information officer, this is critical to, you notice, I'll go back here, you notice it's got its own place on the incident command tree. It's an extremely important position, because the public information officer, who would be appointed by the waterfront director or supplied by another agency of the city, typically City Fire, because they have trained PIOs. They do this day in and day out because they respond to medicals and fires and all kinds of things. But we would have professional PIOs on scene. But they are responsible for some critical parts of the response. Number one, rumor control. They will take information from various sources. They need to vet it. They need to figure out what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false. They'll be responsible for providing updates to the city mayor, the city administrator, city council, and the mayor via frequent press releases, interviews, and Blackboard Connect messages. We have that wonderful tool at the harbor where we can send mass messaging to all the boaters in the harbor. And they may work with other PIOs, county PIOs, a representative of the state might be there in a joint information center. So we would have to find a place for them to work. Their duties not only are operational, like I just described, but they're very much about the message. And what they need to do is they need to reassure the community, gathering information from the various sources and vetting it and ground truthing it. They need to reassure the community that we are on task, that our mission is attached to our Clean Marina program, that what caused the event, and that will come straight through our scientific advisors. We will be able to, through the PIO, filter any public health concerns or environmental concerns. They will be the ones who let the public know the size and scope of the event, the mitigation strategies, and the anticipated duration of the event, and how we're going about mitigating what we've got out there. They will have to be on task and on message 24/7, especially during operational periods, which are typically 10 hours long. So they're going to be a critical component of this whole deal. The logistics section, those are the folks who get stuff. My colleague to the right, Carl Treiberg, and no doubt his colleague, our newest colleague, Brian Bossy, and our waterfront analyst will all be involved in this. And this is recalling personnel. This is working with the emergency services manager to get CERT-trained volunteers, community emergency response trainees who we have hundreds of them who we can lean on. They will be responsible for helping screen, train, and sign in Good Sam volunteers. A lot of people are going to come out of the woodwork and want to help, and that's a good thing. But we got to get them signed in. We got to get them then confirmed as disaster services workers. We got to sign them in. We got to sign them out. We now got to know that they went in and that they came out and they didn't fall in the bay and disappear. These are all very, very important aspects of the volunteer effort. The logistics folks would also work with the private and public entities to procure cleanup and disposal materials. Everything from the front loaders to the liners for the dumpsters to the dumpsters themselves to the food for the various volunteers during the operational cycles. This is a huge load for the logistics folks, and they will have their hands full coordinating it. They'll also be the ones that's responsible for coordinating the disposal of the dead fish and coordinating the site cleanup. So the logistics folks, sounds like we've got a lot of loads on a lot of people and a lot of sections here, but it's all very true. This is an environmental disaster that's going to require all hands on deck. And this plan, we hope, will be the structure that we can use so that people will know what to do when it happens. The planning section is overseen by the waterfront, and I'm sure we'll have help from the Community Development Department because they're experts in this. They have several representatives at the Emergency Operating Center uptown when we have regional disasters. They would coordinate with operations for ongoing situation status reports. They're the ones who will also be speaking to the PIOs. They'll be in charge of what's called the SIT-STAT board, situation status boards, keeping people who are working to mitigate the disaster up to speed as to what exactly is happening, what the situation is at any given time and any given place in the marinas when the disaster is being addressed. They'll establish the operational areas. I can't tell you where exactly the 100 tons of dead fish is going to show up. We might learn a little more when we talk about the salad boat later in the Clean Marina discussion and where, fish tipping garbage, plastic ends up. But we could take some guesses, but we can't tell you where those areas would be. The planning folks would establish those and the operational periods and the goals for each operational period. So when you come into an operational period with a new set of volunteers, fed and happy and ready to work, they know what the goals for that operation, that period are. clean out A through H in Marina 1 and get that stuff up to the dumpster and get it out of there would be a typical example of an operational goal for an operational period. The finance folks would typically be our accounting staff. If we were going to, first of all, they have to process any purchase orders. We're going to be buying food and renting like crazy from Milpas Rentals and other places, equipment and getting it from uptown. And so they're going to be in charge of the purchase order, the requisition and purchase order side of it. They'll be responsible for paying the vendors. And they'll also be responsible for tracking timesheets, invoices for cost estimates, and or reimbursement. In other words, if this turns out to be a disaster that we can get reimbursed for the cleanup, it'll be our accounting staff, possibly with some assistance from the finance department, who is tracking all of that labor and effort and cost that's being poured into this mitigation, so that we can apply for mitigation for reimbursement if and when it becomes available. And finally, there's the operations section. Who's that? Those are the folks in the field. That's overseen by the Harbor Patrol supervisor. They're the ones who get to the field. They're good at this, I can tell you. They would conduct the initial size up. It's based on another acronym called IDEA. It's to isolate, deny, evacuate, and assess. You can see what it's related to here. They need to size up the situation. It's just like the way you size up a fire. They need to isolate it, deny access to the area, evacuate liveaboards or people if they're just in the way as necessary, and then establish the access protocols. Who can come in, who can come out by land or by sea. They assist the perimeter security with city police. They help manage vessel traffic. They would be the ones who assign dock bosses. Typically, in a situation like this, we learned this in Redondo, if you have 200 people working in a dock, you need people, you need a mini manager managing those docks. You need dock bosses who are disseminating the materials and directing people where to do their work and directing the operation in the sort of subsections of the response. They oversee the removal and disposal of the fish, and they conduct the timely briefings because they're the ones who are on the ground. They know what's happening, and they can inform the other sections of what's the status of the event. So in conclusion, we believe the addition of a fish die-off plan, response plan to our emergency response plan manual will put us in a better position to address this type of event should it occur in Santa Barbara Harbor. And also, finally, I'd like to add a special thanks to the City of Redondo Beach and the Ventura Port District, and of course to our Emergency Services Manager for their contributions to this effort. It's certainly been invaluable, and I think by the time we commit this to our Emergency Response Plan Manual, we'll feel a lot better about addressing this kind of event should it happen. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that excellent report, Mick, and fascinating. Questions, comments, Commissioner
Madam Chair, if I may just
Scott.
wrap up. This type of field trip down to another harbor, especially with a specific problem in mind, these are invaluable lessons for us to learn. And Mick and I enjoyed our trip. Dan Madrigal really was a wealth of information for us. But I was particularly impressed. They had no idea what was on their hands. They showed up for work at 7:30 in the morning, and the harbor was full of dead fish. Within minutes, a news helicopter happened to be flying by and noticed the harbor was full of dead fish, so it hit the media immediately. And so they had this huge media issue to get out and under control, figure out what actually did happen. And it was interesting just seeing a fireman, a career fireman, fall back on this SEMS type of approach, which I never would have thought of. But as we sat there and walked through it, it made every sense in the world. So I was really impressed by the media and how they dealt with that. And the low-tech solution seemed to be the one that worked. Getting people out there with buckets with holes in them, scooping them up, and getting them out of the harbor is ultimately how it worked. It was the best way. You know, we were thinking Vector trucks and all sorts of other ways, but netting them with the fishing boats. And finally, right in the middle of this, Mick did not mention, but right in the middle of this cleanup effort was when last year's tsunami came through. So they're out there picking up dead fish, and then they had to evacuate everybody from the harbor. The tsunami came through, and it had more effect on them down there. They had boats breaking loose and docks breaking loose. You just couldn't ask for a worse scenario. So, and thanks, Mick, for the thorough report.
Well, thank you. Commissioner Bantalan.
Just want to say quickly thank you. You know, so often government might not, you know, they might be reactive. We're being proactive. It's a totally plausible situation. So I just think it's great that we're prepared. So thank you for that.
So it reminds me very much of the oil spill response that I participated in the training and that Harbor Patrolman Stetson did as well. It's a fascinating process. Thank you very much for that report. So next in the new business is the Clean Marina, which if you can give us another report, Mr. Godman.
Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and consider an annual report on the department's Clean Marina program.
Technical error, we're going to get right to it here. Worked so perfectly when I was practicing. Thank you, Carl. I appreciate it. Madam Chair, Commissioners, with the exception of Commissioner Webb, you've all had the great pleasure of hearing this report more than once each year. And so what I've tried to do, and I discussed this with Scott, we have these elements of the Clean Marina program, and I'm going to try to address all 6 of them as I always do, but I'm going to try and consolidate the overview. So this will be another one of those 10,000-foot things. And Commissioner Webb, especially, I encourage you to interrupt me at any time if there's something that is new to you that I'm glossing over that the other commissioners are aware of, and I'd be happy to stop and answer it. But by way of background, we've had a Clean Marina program in Santa Barbara Harbor since 2002. I think all of us share a bit of pride in the fact that we got ahead of any of the either state mandated or industry programs, and it's really served us well. It's broken up into 6 different elements, which you see here, and without naming them all, I'm just going to jump in and we will deal with them one at a time. The first one is facilities for boaters. We learned a long time ago that if we can bring the facilities to the boaters and not make the boaters go to the facilities, that helps make the marina a lot cleaner place. And I got to credit Charlie Watson, former commissioner, always harped on that, and he was absolutely right. And a classic example of that is our sewage pump-out program. We have 5 sewage pump-outs in the harbor, and here's a summary over the years. As you can see, it's starting to flatline around, it looks like about 100,000 gallons of sewage a year. It goes up, it goes down, but it pretty much, except for the spike in FY06, it's pretty much around that 7,000 gallon mark, and 7,000 minute mark, and that's a lot of minutes to be removing sewage over the year. I got to compliment the boating community on their efforts, and I think this has really helped cut down on any sewage discharges in the harbor. We also have a bilge water pump out at the fuel dock. And with the absence of a data gap in 2008, this has been fairly consistent. The recent, you'll see this reflected in other parts of the report too. In recent years, especially since 2009, we've seen a reduction in minutes at the bilge water pump out, and we scratch our heads and try and figure out how could this be. We're not seeing a greater sheen in the harbor, and all we can figure out is it's reflective of the 20 to 25% less visitorship we've had from boaters who often use these facilities. And so, other than that, we're really at a loss to explain it, and we're very much on top of the metering of this now. So we think the metering is accurate, but we had about 4,000 gallons of bilge water removed in 2011, still a significant amount, and we believe. I was reminded of this, Commissioner Bandelon, when you asked about the sheens. Oh, excuse me, maybe it was the chair, but you asked about the sheens from oil spills. And this is one of the primary ways we keep sheens out of the harbor, is getting that bilge oil out of water so that mixture of oil and water doesn't come pumping through a bilge pump and create, all it takes is a quart to cover the entire harbor. Debris nets, you've heard about these. Back in 2005, we installed 40 of them around the docks. I see that we only replaced 6 in FY11. We used to think they rotted out, but they seem to go missing more than they rot out. So people's pools must be very clean. At least 6 people's pools must be very clean. But we only lost 6 this last year, and we're very much believers in the fact that these are good to have if right-minded folks want to net small debris out of the harbor. And believe it or not, they may come in handy during a fish die-off response. Waste oil disposal, we have 3 waste oil disposal facilities in Marina 2, Marina 4, and at the fuel dock. And we had some kind of metering either an absence of data or a metering problem or a weighing problem, but this year's gallonage was twice what it had been in the last few years. We think it's a computing error, and so what we've done is we have doubled down our efforts to make sure that we are correctly measuring the amount of waste oil leaving Santa Barbara Harbor. But the bottom line is we had over 7,000 gallons that went out this year, and that's a lot of oil. And again, we take our hat off to the boaters because they're the ones using the waste oil stations, and that's oil that's not going in the bay and not going in the ocean. Marine battery collection, we have a marine fiberglass marine battery box. It's at the fuel dock near the end of the pier. We've only been counting the batteries for a few years, and it looks like, again, this may be visitorship, but the number of batteries is off. And these are estimates, and the estimates, the reason they're estimates is because anybody can put a battery in those boxes. Boaters can put a battery in those boxes, and occasionally, unfortunately, people from uptown, though we discourage it, will put a battery in those boxes. And the folks at the fuel dock sell batteries, and they estimate that for every battery they sell, every battery that's put in the box, they sell a battery. So this is a combination of the ones that are in the boxes added to the number they sell from the fuel dock. So if you sell 150 from the fuel dock and 150 turn up from other sources, you have a total of 300. We'll keep tracking this over the years, but I'm confident they're not going in the bay. This was an issue that you're going to hear about little about later in this report that we really think we've got a handle on. That throwing battery in the bay is not okay. Fishing line recycling, we have 3 relatively brand new fishing line recycling stations, one at the Wharf Bait and Tackle, one on the shoreward finger of Stearns Wharf at Sea Landing. Folks use them, and the line gets recycled and sent to Berkeley Fishing Lines, and it's a wonderful opportunity. We are seeing far less line being thrown in waste baskets. If it gets thrown in the blue recycling buckets, we take those out and we stick it in these typically. So these are serving a good purpose as well, and hopefully keeping them away from the birds. The next section is water quality. We do monthly dry season testing, as you know. We don't test in the winter because all kinds of contaminants come down and it's wasted money. We would certainly find bacterial contamination in the wintertime. It's non-point source pollution coming up from up the watershed. We test 7 stations in the dry season for 3 bacterial indicators. This year, unlike last year when we had no upsets, we had 3. We had 2 were at Station 11, which is a notoriously poor circulation area. It's over there where the small boat launch ramp is and where the construction for the human-powered docking facility and the launch ramp repairs are going on right now. Tough place to get circulation. We had a couple of upsets, bacterial upsets there. The other was at Station 10, that big black dot you see by Ofinger. And again, we're in the guessing game or the surmising game, and the best we could surmise was that test may very well have been taken when the Ofinger construction was going on in the new marina construction, the renovation, and there was a significant period of time where there were no boats on that finger, and during that time there were a lot of birds on that finger, and it's our best guess that may have been a direct correlation to the birds on that finger. As soon as the boats moved in, the birds moved off to other more comfortable roosting spots, and the test in the area tested clean. Dissolved oxygen tests, you know, we test for DO. Somehow a slide is missing here. We test for dissolved oxygen, and basically we do that so that we are able to, as a precursor to die-off events. And what we found was that, and hopefully it's in your packet, I know it's in the report, was that in April and May we had some low DO readings, and those corresponded directly to the events that were occurring in Redondo and Ventura. And so when we get low DO readings, we post the gates so fishermen can move their receivers outside the harbor into waters that have higher dissolved oxygen readings. In your package, you'll see that there are shaded areas that indicate readings of higher than 5 milligrams per liter of water. That's the baseline for a healthy and abundant sea life. We had more upsets this past year than we like to see, which really all the more puts us on an alert for a potential fish die-off. They're typically the result of algal blooms. We have in East Beach, we do monitoring too, and that's for heavy metals and bacteria. Results out there are almost always good. We've been doing that since we established the East Beach mooring program in 2006. And just looking at that, you can tell this doesn't look like a place where you're going to have low dissolved oxygen level readings. It's beautiful, clean, clear water. Typically, the lower dissolved oxygen readings are in bays that don't get a lot of flushing. For example, you don't see it in Morro Bay because they got a 3-knot tide that runs in and out of there. You typically see it in harbors, especially ones that like Redondo that don't get flushing as much as they could. And I see this was out of order is what happened. So here's your dissolved oxygen tests. And there's the numbers I was referring to before. I apologize for that being out of order. And finally, I want to talk to you a bit about the dry dock. The harbor has leased area to the dry dock for an overwater dry dock facility, haul-out facility, going back into the early 1970s, possibly late 1960s. And we had a dry dock all the way up until last year. But in 2002, we had an interesting event. We had a boater come to the both the Fish and Game and the Regional Water Quality Control Board and complained about the fact that people were throwing batteries into the ocean off the dry dock, that the sediments below the dry dock were contaminated. And he said that he knew this because he was one of the people who did it. So the regional board took him seriously, the Fish and Game took him seriously, and a series of studies ensued that actually not only include Santa Barbara Harbor, it include many harbors on the Central Coast, but in Santa Barbara they took a look at several areas, both water quality and sediment studies, and in particular they looked at the location of the dry dock, under the dry dock, the water and the sediment, in the old dry dock location, under the fuel dock because they sell batteries, and that was one of the claims that batteries were being tossed over, and along the city pier, of course, because people, fish trucks and what have you are out there. And the western breakwater, the breakwater running along Brophy Brothers, because they have a drain that comes out that at the time, before Harbor Marine Works ultimately created built a diversion system to divert their runoff water from their boatyard into the city sewer after it went through a 2-stage clarifier that took out the sediments. Water was coming from there into the harbor through the western breakwater storm drain there. That was an area of interest as well. So they looked at all of those, and because the boatyard retrofitted their wastewater runoff, and because the dry dock disappeared in 2010, and because these studies indicated that although there was a little higher contamination under the dry dock than the rest of the harbor, the types of contamination you found in the harbor were fairly consistent with what was characterized in a whole lot of harbors along the Central Coast. The Regional Water Quality Control Board proposed to close this site, to close their case investigating this site and these areas. And this was of interest to us for several reasons. Number one, we keep getting billed for oversight costs from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and they are not small bills for their efforts to, oversee this area. And in addition, the dry dock is gone. We have no plans to dredge there. At the most, we're going to put docks there, and that's, of course, something on the water. That's nothing that would disturb the bottom unreasonably. And so what the regional board did is they issued a comment letter for invited comments that went through the middle of April. Well, they received some comments. They received some comments from Heal the Ocean, and they received, I believe, a comment from one of our slip permittees. And so we communicated with them, and they decided to increase the comment period through the middle of May. And in addition, last week we sent out that comment period letter describing the history, describing the proposed closure of the area and what they had found and what they proposed to do to all the slip permittees in the harbor. We sent one to everybody this last week. In fact, last Friday, Carl and I were drummed into folding and stuffing duty for a while. So that comment period will go through the 16th of next month. This is the location of the most recent location of the dry dock, gives you a visual of what was there and what is not anymore. It's that area underneath. That was the area of concern along with the city pier and the western end of the western breakwater. And so we're looking forward to working with the regional board and working with concerned entities to bring this project to a close. And finally, the issue of alternative bottom paints. We've talked about it a lot in the past years. We've talked about different studies being done by different entities, different trials in the harbor. Santa Barbara Channel Keeper did a trial. California Sea Grant did a trial. What I'd like to focus on tonight, very briefly, is what we've done. In 2008, on our patrol boats, we painted Patrol Boat 3's bottom with a ceramic based paint, and that was basically a slick bottom to which the animals were not supposed to adhere. Didn't work. So that was not a successful experiment. In 2009, we switched on the same vessel to a zinc-based non-copper bottom paint, which we found to be a suitable substitute and is still in use on Patrol Boat 3. That's our aluminum 32-footer, 33-footer. And in 2011, we moved to Patrol Boat 2, and we're trying a zinc and Econia combination. Econia is, I've tried to find out exactly what is in Econia. It's a biocide that has a proprietary component that is marketed by paint manufacturers, but it is non-copper and it is non-metallic, and a lot of folks are using it, and it's registered with the state of California, and it's okay with the Department of Pesticide Regulation, so it's okay with us. That's sort of our standard for whether it's a clean marina activity. And of course, and I'm going to jump, before I talk about Senate Bill 623, I just wanted to mention down at the bottom, where's the future for AFPs, as they're called, anti-fouling paints? The world is moving towards metal-free, but there is a product out there that was just in January approved by California's Department of Pesticide Regulation, which is a very interesting paint. It's 99% copper, but it's captured in an epoxy resin, and it's not painted on the outside of the boat just like a typical bottom paint would be. The epoxy resin is painted on the bottom of the boat, but the copper, as I understand it, is encapsulated in little spirals inside the resin. And it sounds a bit anthropomorphic to me, but I talked to the distributors, and they say that barnacles and what have you get a quote-unquote tingly feeling, and they don't want to attach to the bottom of the boat. It's been used for many years in Europe. It gets rave reviews from the folks we've talked to. I'm not promoting this. I'm just telling you this may be part of the future as well. The distributors promote the fact that you don't have to paint the bottom for 10-year periods, and all you have to do is periodically wipe off the slime. I'm the conduit here, the messenger. I'm just saying the future may include this type of copper alternative. You know, we're also certified under a regional multi-state clean marina program. We were recertified last June. It's a rigorous review. You see our clean marina flag flying beneath the American flag. We're very proud of it. We were recertified, and then I went up in December and served because we went through the recertification. I was certified as an examiner, and I went up to Morro Bay and participated in their recertification examination in 2011. But this is a very rigorous review. It's industry sponsored. It was undertaken by industry, so quite frankly, the government didn't have to do it because they wanted to tailor it to industry's needs. But the Coastal Commission and other agencies are constantly looking over their shoulder, and so they've had to make it stricter and tougher every year, and it is in compliance with the strictest practices in BMP. So it's a great program. We're proud to be part of it. Our Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program, or SWIPPY as it's called, the city has to have a stormwater prevention program, and we have to have one as part of the city's plan. And what it basically is it describes the waterfront property and all those areas in our property, roofs, parking lots, trash enclosures, all those places that could be sources of stormwater runoff. Visual inspections are done multiple times a year, both quarterly and after rain events. They're done by a consultant, Science Applications International Corporation. They send their results to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. We had no discharges in FY11, no significant ones. We also have a stormwater management plan courtesy of the state, and that's one that really requires of us to do a lot of public outreach, have best management practices, be able to have discharge detections both for bilge oil and for sewage, and you know we do that. And we continually coordinate with the regional board to update the plan as necessary. An example would be when we added the prohibition against using phosphate non-biodegradable phosphate-style cleaners on boats and washing those into the bay as gray water. We added that to our slip regulations last year. We have BMPs for all the work we do, that contractors do, vacuum cleaners, booms, skiff cleanup, you name it, we've got it. All of them are listed in your staff report. Anybody who wants to see what those BMPs are, they can just go online and see those listed in the staff report. Oil pad distribution, for years we've been giving out free oleophilic pads. Those are the oil pads you use to mop up your bilges or to prevent oil leaks at the fuel dock. This is interesting. Our pad distribution has jumped to 20,000. That's the highest it's been, tying the record for FY05. We believe, actually, it's exceeded the record in 05. It's our new PR. It's our new personal record. And we believe that we have moved the pads behind the counter to ensure that people don't take more than their fair share. So it's not that. But what we do believe, and I hope this is the truth, that it's reflective of the cultural change, of people's dedication to clean marina practices, and the fact that they know that the Coast Guard and Harbor Patrol will be right on it, because fuel spills get reported to us immediately these days, whether it's the sheen we've talked about or thick crude oil. So I think folks are really conscious about using the oil pads to clean up any small amounts of oil in their bilges and what have you. And then, of course, we continue our dedication to bird protection. It's part of the goal as stated in the Clean Marina program, and we do it mostly through education and signage. Again, I got to thank Frank Drew at the Bait and Tackle store out on the ends of Stearns Wharf. He goes above and beyond to educate people out there. And we enjoy working with the Wildlife Care Network and Commissioner Kramer and her people. We have signage. We just updated the signage so it has the correct phone numbers for the Wildlife Care Network. But we have signage on the breakwater, the rock groin, and the wharf. And we are doing our very best to make sure people obey wildlife protection rules. Pollution prevention. We have our salad boat. That's the boat that goes around every Saturday, and the boat and a dock worker go around and clean up debris, light debris around the harbor. Folks should look at the staff report. I'm not going to name all of these bullets, but it's really a great service, and they also clean up after big events like the harbor festivals. It adds to our ability to keep the harbor clean and give us a nice environmental appearance. Where does the stuff collect? Here's where we're learning. It collects in Area C. Again, where do we have our biggest problem with dissolved oxygen? Area C. So it's not surprising that in an area of low tidal action that would be an area of collection. Area A, where we have storm drain coming down from the City College. I'm not blaming them, but we have a storm drain coming down from City College. It's also a low circulation area. We used to call it Bridley Corner because John always used to insist that we kept a close eye on that and get it cleaned up. And the other area I looked through all last year's salad boat reports. Area H, the west-facing fingers in Area H tend to act like a comb and grab plastic bags, wrappers, styrofoam cups, tennis balls, you name it. They tend to get stuck in those west-facing docks. So if asked which way does the current flow in and out of Santa Barbara Harbor, if I had to make a guess, I would tell you it goes clockwise. We've been asked that by City College and other folks because of the way those fingers act in Marina One. We have grants. Thank goodness we have grants. We have abandoned watercraft abatement grants. Those are the grants we use from the state, from DBOD, to get boats off the beach. We had a grant for $42,500 that we got in November of 2010. We have $18,000 remaining on it, and graciously, DBOS allowed us to leave that as it is and utilize it through June of 2013, which is great because it's going to be a lot less paperwork as well. We also have a vessel turn-in program. That's the program where folks can say, you know what, this boat's going to end up on the beach. I want to surrender it. I want to give it to you. Here's the junk certificate. You take it, city. And we have a grant from the DBA to dispose of those. We disposed of 11 vessels in the last 2 years with $8,000. We just finished an application for $15,000 for the next year. We believe that the Abandoned Watercraft Abatement Fund is slowly going to morph into the vessel turn-in program because it's proving so successful up and down the coast, which is great news. It means we'll get to the boats before they sink or go on the beach. That's true in many jurisdictions, not ours. The mooring permits, I'm not going to go into great depth on this because I reported to you 2 months ago on the East Beach mooring program. We still, the status hasn't changed since I reported to you. We have 25 solid moorings out there, no problems with them. We're not installing any more of the rubber band style C-Flex moorings. We do have 2 of them out there that have just got serviced. They're doing fine, so we're crossing our fingers that those 2 will be okay. And we did have City Council amend the mooring policy recently, though, at your recommendation, to add a $50 application fee to participate in the mooring lottery. We hope that'll reduce the size of the lotteries to folks that are only the serious players and the ones that will follow through on their permit application offers. And of course, Operation Clean Sweep, that would sure be a repeat, wouldn't it, if I talked about that? It's coming up May 5th. We're still taking volunteers. We hope to see them down there. 5th of the 6th is our educational resources. If you come into our offices, people will find tons of literature, California Sea Grant, Coastal Commission, DBA, and we also, of course, have a Clean Marina Corner in our dock lines, our departmental newsletter, and we have Clean Marina articles in the log newspaper. For example, Operation Clean Sweep, the last issue, has a big article about that. Harbor Patrol keeps its certifications in underwater hull cleaning certification, and they also have to maintain their current certifications with oil spill training response. And finally, Madam Chair, is compliance and enforcement, the hammer, if you will. It's really in 2 categories here: marine sanitation device inspections. This is where we inspect the MSDs, or the holding tanks of visiting vessels and liveaboards. And visiting vessel MSD inspections directly tracks to visiting vessel occupancy. So this drop-off in MSD inspections steadily, it almost parallels the economy. It's an amazing curve. Starting in 2008, you see what it's done, and it's starting to flatten out a little bit here in FY11. This directly reflects the number of boats that we are, visiting boats that we're seeing in Santa Barbara Harbor, visiting Santa Barbara Harbor. So we had just short of 800 MSD inspections in FY11. To me, that's a fascinating curve and a direct tie-out. Discharge violations, we only had 2 cites written this year. One, an individual got some engine degreaser in the harbor, and we had an individual decided not intelligently to dump a barrel of rotten bait in the harbor, and he was cited. But the ratio of warnings to citations continues to reflect our emphasis on education over badge-heavy approach, if you will. And you can see here the blue, which is warnings, the red, which is cites. The cites has been less than 5 citations for pollution every year since FY05, and warnings anywhere from 10 to 27, 28. But you can see even the warnings are starting to go down. So we look at this as continued success, and we don't really think there's a whole lot broken here, and we hope to continue doing the same work we're doing now, and just get better at it and do more of it. And finally, the costs. What I've done here, folks can access the report and look at the gross cost of the program. What I've done here is I've extracted the grant that we get, the money from those grants, for an annualized real cost to our operation fund, and it's about $21,000. Again, this is beginning to flatline too. It doesn't mean that, if we had big storms and we had to spend $10,000 getting bamboo or a rundo out of the harbor, we wouldn't do it. But in normal years, when there are no unusual upsets, it seems to be a $20,000 to $25,000 program, and we think we're getting a lot of bang for the buck. So in conclusion, we think it's an important contribution to our overall mission. It highlights the importance of maintaining a clean ocean environment for those who visit, recreate, or work here, and as well as the marine life and the avian life that, of course, that depend on a clean harbor to thrive. Thank you for your patience, as always, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that. Actually, I always look forward to it, so it's an excellent report. Commissioners, any questions, comments? Anybody?
Great report.
Well, I have a question in terms of the die-off and the dissolved oxygen. What did they tell you? What percentage was the percentage of dissolved oxygen at the time of the die-off in either Redondo or Ventura, so we could compare this and the?
Madam Chair, you know what? That's a great question. I don't recall they did, but you'll have that answer when I get back to my desk and give them a call.
Oh, okay. And did they give you any idea of what caused it originally?
Same thing. Algal bloom.
Algal bloom?
Yeah. Naturally occurring algal bloom. Getting
Why
to
did the sardines all come into the harbor, for instance, and be there? I mean, I was
right.
wondering at the time.
You know, that's a great question. It's anticipated that animals escaping algal blooms can crowd a harbor like that. The same thing happens rather frequently in Santa Cruz Harbor, where huge shoals of sardines will come into the harbor. But these are best guesses, really. But what they do know is that they typically occur during times when algal blooms are present. So the animals may get, I really don't want to get anthropomorphic about it, the animals may get sick for one reason or another relative to the algal bloom and crowd themselves into the harbor. I can't really give you a cause and effect, but there seems to be a relationship between the two. The algal blooms that were occurring when the Redondo event happened, the Ventura event happened, were also occurring off our coast when our modest die-off happened last spring, where we were kind of going, okay, I hope tomorrow it isn't worse than it is today because we're going to have to get into action. But there seems to be a relationship. But I will find out the DO levels for you and get back to you.
It'd be interesting, and also because about 10 years or so ago, we here had a major domoic acid outbreak, and which affected many of the seabirds. But there was no die-off of fish. I mean, fish didn't swarm into the harbor, so there must be some other explanation.
Well, I think. Thank you for bringing that up. Domoic acid is not necessarily a cause of fish die-off.
No, I understand that,
people should know that.
But sometimes there is a relation.
Sometimes there is a relationship, and that's when the birds get affected because they eat the fish, and the birds have a problem. In the Redondo event, we had no indication that there was any unreasonable amount of birds or unusual amount of birds that died during that event.
I'd be interested in the percentage. And I had two other minor questions, small questions. And what's the status of the mooring lottery? Do you expect to do another fairly soon?
Madam Chair, thank you for asking. We're anticipating the possibility of one late this year, either in November or December.
All right, and let's see. And also, if you know of what the status of Eric Schwartz's and the others' complaints about the failure of the moorings?
Sure. Following our discussion here at the commission about that, the very next day, Mr. Schwartz was given all the information he was asking for. We subsequently met with the city attorney's office and had a powwow about what were the reasonable expectations under the California Public Records Act request, and they agreed that the information we had released to Mr. Schwartz was appropriate.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Anybody else? Any questions, comments? So I guess at this point it's the commission staff communications. Do we have any?
Madam Chair, just two items real quickly. I spoke with you earlier this week about on May 2nd, the Waterfront Department will be presenting its budget recommendation to the City Council in these chambers between 9 and noon. If anyone cares to attend and get yet another presentation on the Waterfront Department budget, that'll be a council budget work session involving airport, waterfront, and the solid waste and division of the finance department. And I believe that's a Wednesday, May 2nd, 9 to noon. So that's going on. And then we may cancel the May meeting depending on the outcome of the negotiations with paddle sports, how far we get with that. And additionally, as I mentioned, the Finance Committee's recommendation to review the Waterfront Department reserves, it's not a real time-sensitive thing. So I would like to get Brian Bossy on board for those discussions with the Budget Committee and then bring it to the full commission. So those two items may not be ready to go in May. So I just wanted to give you, Mary will send out notice in advance of that, but I just wanted to let you know early on that that's something that's under consideration.
Do we have anything, anyone? The only thing, I met on March 28th as following on Frank Kelly's pattern of the chair of the commission meeting with the other commissioners, and we had a fine tour of the wastewater treatment plant. And I wouldn't say people were terribly interested in the harbor and the waterfront, but I said we were proceeding smoothly. So I don't have anything else. And I guess one motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, before you do, I just had one other item to add, and I must apologize to my colleague for this. I intended to thank Teresa Lawler, our engineering tech at the waterfront, for her considerable work and assistance with that PowerPoint on the Clean Marina. Thank you for entertaining that extra tidbit.
Sure, thanks.
Moved to adjourn the meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.